Hey there, Louis Alcabelos here. Thanks for stopping by. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to create a table in a scoped application in ServiceNow. Now, before we get started, what exactly is a scoped app? Well, a scoped app is a private container that stores all of the files and components associated with a specific application. You can think of a scoped app as a shell that kind of defines the boundaries of that application and protects its components from changes that might be made elsewhere in ServiceNow. Now, scoped apps in ServiceNow are created in App Engine, which is ServiceNow's low-code application development platform. Now, before I get started, I am running a ServiceNow developer instance. You can get a developer instance for free. If you're interested in doing that, check out the link in the description below. And this is the latest release, which is the Quebec release of ServiceNow. Now, in terms of the data table that I'm going to be creating, I am creating an app here that is going to be used to manage invoice review and approval workflows. Okay, so specifically the table that I'm creating is going to be used to record details about invoices that need to be reviewed and then ultimately processed for payment. So what I'm going to show you is how to create the table in the scoped app from scratch, how to add reference fields that allow you to reference or look up data from other existing tables, how to add string and date fields, and also how to add currency fields. All right, so to create a table, what you want to do is you want to navigate into Studio, which is the Integrated Development Environment, or IDE for short, in ServiceNow App Engine. I am already in Studio, and I am specifically in my invoice approval app. From here, the first thing that you want to do is click Create Application File. This is where you can actually come to add all of the different components of an application, such as data tables, forms, properties, etc. Okay. Now, in order to create a table, you want to click on the data model grouping. Okay. And from here, you can see you have the option to create a table. So you can click on this. Alternatively, you can just filter for the element that you're looking for. So typing in table is going to bring up the same result that we just saw. Now that you select table, you want to click on create. Now what you need to do here is to go ahead and define or describe the table that you're creating. Okay, so the first thing that you want to do is you want to give your table a label. Okay, I am going to call this invoices. Okay, and you'll notice when I tab down that ServiceNow is automatically going to populate the name of this table. And the way this works is that it's going to come up with a name that uses the value entered in the label field as well as the unique identifier associated with your instance, okay, and as well as the name of your application. Now, the next thing you can do with your table is you can decide whether or not a table is extending another table. Now, what exactly does that mean? Well, if you extend another table, that means that you are going to inherit all of the attributes or the columns from the table that you are extending. Okay, now to extend a table, what you want to do is you want to enter a selection in the extends table field. So some examples are the task table. This is a common one that you might extend if you're going to be creating tasks in your app. Now, in this case, I'm not going to be extending any table, so I am just going to leave this field blank. Next, you have the option of choosing whether you want to create a module for this table. Now, what exactly is a module? Well, a module is going to have this particular table appear in the navigator of your ServiceNow instance. Okay, so creating a module is going to allow you to actually see a menu option in the filter navigator to be able to access this table, to be able to view and create records associated with this table. Okay, by default, create module and create mobile module are checked. I'm just going to leave this as is. And if we are creating a module, you want to specify where this module should be added, okay, in terms of which menu. And if you click on this drop down, these are essentially going to represent all of the different menu options that appear in the ServiceNow filter navigator. Now, what I'm going to do is create a new module, okay, and you can give this module menu a name, and I'm going to call this invoice approval workflow, okay, so that whenever I type in invoice approval workflow, I'm going to be able to access this particular table. Now, the next thing you want to do here is go ahead and click on submit to actually create your table. Okay, and so now your table has been created. And if we scroll down, you can see here by default on the columns tab, there are some columns that have already been created on this table. Okay, and if you look at these are your typical audit fields. So created by is going to record the user that's creating records. That created is going to capture, the date of creation, updates, updated by, etc. Now the next thing I'm going to do is now add the columns that I require to this table. So to add a column to a table, on the columns tab, you want to click on the new button. Okay, and this is going to bring up the dictionary entry new record. This is essentially how you would create a column on a particular table. Okay, and you can see here our table is already referenced here in the table field. The next thing you need to do here is to select the data type associated with this column that you want to create. Okay, now the first column that I am going to create is going to be called buyer, and this is going to represent essentially the requester or the user that's submitting this particular record, these invoices, review and approval. And so this particular column is going to be a reference. So I'm going to type in reference, okay, and I'm going to select that. And a reference table allows me to refer to another table for the purposes of either referencing or looking up data from that table, okay? Next, you want to give your table a label, okay? This essentially represents the view for this column, so how you actually see this column name, okay? And I'm going to call this column buyer, and I'm going to press tab. And you're going to notice again that the column name automatically populates. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to put invoice underscore buyer to make this easily identifiable. Okay. Next, on the right hand side, you have some additional options. Okay. Active, I would recommend just leaving this checked as it is by default. If you wanted to make a particular column read-only, you can check this. If you want to make a column required, you can check mandatory. And if you want this particular column to be displayed on your record forms, then you want to check display. Okay, I'm just going to check display and leave everything else as is for now. Now, because this is a reference column, the next thing that we need to do is to click on the reference specification tab. Okay, and essentially this is where you come to define what table you are trying to reference data from. Okay, and again, if you search in this field, you can see some commonly accessible tables. Okay, now in this case, because this is buyer, this represents individuals, I'm going to type user. Okay, and I'm going to look for sys underscore user, which is the central user table in ServiceNow. Okay, so I want to be able to look up individuals from my user table. Now I'm going to go ahead and click submit. Okay, perfect. And now I'm going to click back into my table, and I am just going to right click on this menu and reload this form here. All right, and you can see here that the buyer column has now been added and it's data type reference, and it's referencing the user table. Now I'm going to add another column. This time I'm going to add a string, okay, string type column. And this is going to be my invoice number column. So this is where the users are going to enter in the invoice number. Okay, and because this is a string, we need to put in the max length, and I'm going to enter in 200. So this field can only ever be populated with up to 200 characters. Okay, and again, I'm going to check on the display column so that this field is displayed on my form. Now I'm going to go ahead and click submit. Okay, and I'm going to come back into my invoices tab here, and I'm going to click on new again to add my next column. This time I'm going to add an invoice date column. So this column type is going to be date, and there's date, time, and date. In my use case, I just need date, and I'm going to call this column invoice date. Okay, and I am going to click on display again to have this field be visible on my record form, and I'm going to go ahead and click submit. All right, and my next column that I'm going to add is invoice amount. So this time I'm going to be looking for a data type of currency. We want to be able to capture amounts, and I'm going to call this column invoice amount. Okay, and again, I'm going to have this column be displayed on my form. So I'm going to check display and click on submit. All right, and I'm going to go back into my invoices table here, and I'm going to add my next column, which is going to be a reference column. Okay, so this time I'm going to be adding a field for my supplier or my vendor. Okay, And I'm just going to add invoice in front of my supplier. Okay. And I'm going to display this again. And because it's a reference field, I need to click on reference specification. All right. And in this case, I am going to be referencing the core company table. Okay, so I'm just going to type in company, and you can see here, core company. This is a table that is included in ServiceNow out of the box to record information about companies. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and click on submit. Okay, and the last column that I'm going to add is going to be a string again. And this time, this is going to be invoice description. So we might want our users to provide a brief description of what this invoice is for. Okay, and this time our max length is going to be up to 500. And I'm going to check on display again so that this can be displayed on our form. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click on submit. Okay, so I'm going to come back into my table and I'm going to reload the form. Okay, and you can see here invoice description, invoice amount, supplier, invoice number, invoice date, and buyer. All right, so now that we've created this table, the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm just going to preview what the form view looks like for records to be entered into this table. Okay, now to do that, I'm going to flip over and come into ServiceNow. So I'm going to leave the studio and just pull up ServiceNow. Okay, and you recall when we were creating the table, we were prompted as to whether we want this table to appear in a menu of its own. Okay, and again, we said yes, and we called it invoice. So just by typing invoice in the filter navigator, you're going to see that invoice approval workflow menu that I created. Okay, and you can see here that this table is now accessible in our main navigation pane. So if I click on invoices, this is going to bring me into the list view of records that exist in this table. Now, given that we just created this table, there are no records. But if I click on the new button, this is going to essentially show me the form view of records that would populate that table we just created. Okay, so you can see here buyer, and you can see this again was a reference to our user table, and just starting to type in some values is going to show me results. So for example, Fred Luddy is a user that exists in that user table. Okay, our invoice number, which is the string type column that we created, our invoice date, which was the date data type. Okay, our supplier again, which was a reference to the core company table, and just clicking on the magnifying glass is going to actually allow me to preview the list of records in that table. Okay, our invoice amount, which is a currency type field, and you can see here you can even select from some out of the box currencies. And last but not least, our string field, which was a 500 character string field here for invoice description. So that's it. That is how to create a table in ServiceNow App Engine. I hope you found this tutorial useful. If you did, please like it. Please drop a comment below. And most importantly, please be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel to stay up to date on the latest ServiceNow tutorials. Louis Acobellas here. Thanks for stopping by. Talk to you soon.